Good evening, everyone. How are we doing tonight? My name is Anastasia, and I am the Events and Marketing Manager for Bank Square Books in Mystic, Connecticut, as well as our sister store, Savoy Bookshop and Café in Westerly, Rhode Island. And we're so delighted that you were able to join us for tonight's event. We couldn't be happier that you are here with us this evening, and we are almost ready to get started. So thank you all so much for chatting in. This is absolutely wonderful. I just have a couple quick little pieces of business that we need to just sweep out of the way before we can get going with the event. And the first of which is just a couple little tips and tricks about Crowdcast. So it's really wonderful to see that you guys have been chatting in already, telling us where you're watching from. That's totally fabulous. And we could not be happier to see that. So keep doing that, chat in, tell us where you're watching from, tell us how you're enjoying the cocktails. That's so wonderful. The other thing you can do is ask questions, and you can do so by hitting the Ask a Question button right underneath the stream. And we'll get to those questions throughout the event. So next up, probably the most important feature of Crowdcast is that really fancy little green button that you're seeing underneath the stream that says Buy Animal Wife here. Clicking that button is going to take you back to our website where you can buy a copy of Animal Wife if you haven't already. We still have a few certificates for delicious Young Buns donuts that will accompany copies of Animal Wife. So definitely put in your order comments if you'd like to try and snag one of those. We do have a limited quantity, but like I said, there are some left. Now, before I do our introductions of everyone who's going to be joining us tonight, I just want to take a moment to say thank you to Lara and to our other event partners this evening. This event has been a really remarkable mission of collaboration, and we could not be more proud to be Lara's hometown bookstore. So thank you, Lara, and to our other guests on screen tonight, as well as to Sift and Young Buns Donuts, as well as and Engine Room, who created the Animal Wife cocktail kit. Okay, so let's meet tonight's guests. It is my great pleasure to introduce you to Lara Ehrlich, who we are here to celebrate this evening. And joining Lara to talk about Animal Wife is Joy Baglio, a fiction writer who resides in Northampton, Massachusetts, and is the founder of the Pioneer Valley Writers Workshop. We will also have musical interludes from musicians Kat and Brad, who are a local duo with a fabulous sound that is partly influenced by 50s and 60s pop music. It's going to be a really special treat. So with that, I'm going to get Kat and Brad up on screen for an introductory song.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. It's so great to be here. We're going to kick off with a song off of our album. This is called I Really, Really Want to Be With You. 1, 2, 3. Baby, all I want to do is drive my car around with you. You do not get or seem to understand. I really, really want to be your man. Shall you step in my Corvette? We'll roll fast, we'll go jet. I don't know if you have a single clue. I really, really want to be with you. Baby, I want you. I do not know what else to do. I thought that I would take you for a spin. You're beating all out of the chest away. Baby, I need you. I do not know what else to do. Hop in my car and let's be more than friends. Love is lame, it's just around the bend. I just love all your bows and curls. I wanna take you on a world. Come on now, won't you give me a chance? Wear my jacket, let's have a sweet romance. small and friends. Love is late, it's just another bend. Just like in 1952, where spring for lovers always bloomed. I think the car keys will go vroom, vroom, vroom. I really, really want to be with you. I really, really want to be with you. I really, really want to be with you. I really, really want to be with you.
So, yes, hello. So it is my pleasure to introduce Lara. And I'll start by saying when I first encountered Lara's writing, I had never met her. It was through a very short piece, actually called Foresight, which is included in Animal Wife, and it stuck in my mind for days, which became weeks and months. The piece was actually first in Smoke Long Quarterly, a wonderful journal of flash fiction. But when I first encountered it, all I knew was that something really, really special and rare was happening in that piece, on the level of ideas, in the writing itself, and that this was a really exciting writer who I really resonated with. The writer of this piece relished in the sounds of language in the way I wish more writers would do. This writer was also someone bold, gutsy, chronicling a woman's foreknowledge of all her potential lives. It felt risky and playful and cool in a way that I hadn't encountered, even in stories and books by some of my favorite authors who also use a lot of the same elements of the fantastic. And also underneath this story, this first piece of Lara's that I encountered, was this pulsing sense of humor and wit, this razor-sharp observation and attention to the tiniest details of the human condition and also the most profound questions that we all wonder. So what did I do when I encountered this piece? I did what a normal person in the age of social media might do, which is I followed Lara on Twitter, found her online, and it got even cooler. I learned through finding her there that she had just returned from a mermaid camp, of all places, where she had gone to research for her novel, and she had learned to swim as a mermaid, full tail, with a tribe or a troop of other women swimming as mermaids. So this was especially fascinating to me because I was also writing at the time about mermaids myself. So later that summer, I learned that Lara and I would both be at the same week-long conference on Martha's Vineyard, where we both received fellowships. And I felt like there was an element of fate at work in that. I didn't know what it would be like meeting her or how we get along. We were both obviously two young speculative literary writers, both working on mermaid novels. And needless to say, though, that week and life afterward became a million times better because of meeting her. Not only am I in awe of Lara's words, her lyricism, the way she weaves myth and fairy tale and glittering detail into heartbreaking and relevant narratives that also speak volumes about the inner lives of girls and women, the boldness with which she tackles stories about cape-wearing cage fighters, mothers who are really swans, and what may be the most technically ambitious story about human-to-animal transformation that you'll ever read in The Vanishing Point. But she is one of the nicest, the most humble and hardworking and truly deserving writers that you'll ever meet. Lara's short fiction appears in some of the best literary magazines out there, including Story Quarterly, Friction, Hunger Mountain, Smoke Long Quarterly, the Massachusetts Review, and many others. She's received scholarships and awards from Martha's Vineyard Institute of Creative Writing, the Midwest Writers Workshop, and the Garrett on the Green, and has attended the prestigious Bread Loaf and Tin House Writers' Work conferences. Most recently, her debut, Animal Wife, which we're here in celebration for tonight, was chosen by Anne Hood, a luminary in the literary world, as the winner of the Red Hen Press Fiction Award. Hood called it, quote, sensuous and intelligent with gorgeous prose. Lara is a graduate of the University of Chicago and Boston University. She lives in Connecticut with her husband and daughter, And I'm so thrilled to be here and to introduce her, an author who I am certain you will be hearing more and more about. So let's give it up for Lara Ehrlich.
Oh, you brought tears to my eyes just now. Without hyperbole, I'm like, I have to flop my eyes. Thank you. That was beautiful. And it was my pleasure and so exciting to meet you at Martha's Vineyard as well, and to have kept this connection going and this friendship. So thank you for being here today. And thank you, Ani and Bank Square Books and Savoy for hosting this book launch. And thank you, as Ani said, to all of the partners who have collaborated with us to bring this event to life. And I'm almost done here. Thank you to my family, and I'll just say hi, Emmy. I know you. I can't hear you, but you can hear me. Thank you to my family, to Doug, Mom, Dad, Brenna, Morgan. I know you're all watching as well. And thank you to all of you here tonight. I just heard from the publisher that we've sold more than 1,000 copies so far. So thank you all for purchasing Animal Life, for reading it. I hope you enjoy it. And I'm really excited to be here tonight with all of you in this virtual space. So Joy, what was first? Was I going to read a little bit?
I think you're reading for 5 minutes.
Okay, yeah, you have to prompt me a little bit.
Yeah,
really Joy, right before the event, my fancy curtain fell down, so I'm hoping it'll stay up, but I'm just a little wary of it behind me, so forgive me if it falls down. All right, so I will be reading tonight from Desiree the Destroyer. I'll just start at the beginning, and I won't make it all the way through, but just a couple minutes worth of Desiree. Desiree the Destroyer. Eve's doctor recommends she draw a map of her breasts to become familiar with their topography. Eve imagines such a map veined with blue-green rivers, the ridge of her breastbone, a mysterious world she never wants to visit. Desiree the Destroyer's breasts overflow her spandex jumpsuit, and she dusts them with glitter so they catch the cage lights. She knows how to make an impression. Her spiked knee pads leave puncture wounds in her competitor's thighs. Her mother sews sequins with liberal use. Hang on just a second. Her mother sews her costumes with liberal use of sequins. Desiree the Destroyer designs her own capes. When Eve was growing up, her mother sewed her clothes from 10-cent patterned books. Their covers depicted girls in ruffled dresses. In middle school, the other kids teased Eve, but she couldn't tell her mother she wanted clothes from the mall. Eve is 30 and her mother still makes her dresses. At 30, Desiree the Destroyer still lives with her mother, who lures practice partners into the garage with milk and cookies. The pesticide sprayer from next door, the throat clearer from across the street, the drag racer from down the block. As the door slides shut behind them, they blink in confusion. Cookies crumble in their fists. Desiree the Destroyer strides down the stairs from the mudroom, her cape billowing, her décolletage glittering. They freeze in wonder before her. There was the creep who parked his van across from the elementary school. Desiree the Destroyer crushed his groin. There was the paperboy who lobbed the Sunday edition through her mother's sun porch window. Desiree the Destroyer planted her knee on his neck and made him weep for mercy. There was the Doberman that terrorized small children. Desiree the Destroyer tore out its throat. Eve is a champion of the English language. She arranges her office supplies parallel to the edges of her desk and does not initiate conversation with the other proofreader, Nancy, who shares her cubicle. Nancy is the type of woman Eve could easily become if she were less vigilant. Nancy signs her emails THX. She wears low-cut shirts that reveal her collarbones. She uses both drink tickets at the company holiday party. Nancy has an online dating profile. Still, Eve is eager to appear friendly. She knows everyone's birthday and favorite donut. She approaches office relationships with the same precision she devotes to tracking the time. Her boss has suggested she is perhaps too diligent, though he appreciates her attention to detail. When she tries to ease up, her attention to detail drags her back into thoroughness. Eve fears she is a car with blown-out brakes sliding down the hill. No one is looking. She slips her fingers into her shirt. Desiree the Destroyer can crush a skull between her thighs. Sometimes she squeezes just enough to make a competitor pass out. Some men like that. Every Monday at 9, Eve watches cage fighting. She treats herself to low-cal popcorn and takes notes in a dedicated spiral-bound notebook. Desiree the Destroyer grips the chain link enclosure and throws her head back as the spectator screams throb through her body. They love it, but she doesn't do it for them. She is enthralled to her desires. This is what makes her such a successful sexual partner. Desiree the Destroyer wears her cape to bed, and she is always on top.
Yay. I love that story so much. I
Yeah.
think it forever has changed my view of cage fighting, and I will always see people with glitter and capes and this Desiree the Destroyer passion. Thank you so much for reading that.
Thank you. It's definitely a weird experience to be reading and be talking to you, Joy, and know that there are all these other people listening. It's very strange. But I'll give a quick shout out to some of my BU friends who might notice themselves in that story. It's mostly about me, but I stole some details there. So you know who you are, and thank you. I hope you don't mind.
So as we proceed with talking about this collection, I'll just say that if anyone has questions, I saw one or two come in. I will try to work in the questions as we go. So depending if they kind of fit in, or I might save certain ones till I come to a question to more like that come in, and then I'll kind of combine them. So just feel free to ask them, and we'll try to incorporate them. But let's start with. I want to start by just asking you. Animal Wife is your first collection of stories. It's your first book, and it's told in 15 separate stories that are independent of one another. Some are very, very short. Others are longer. But for anyone who isn't familiar with short story collections, can you talk briefly about what is a collection of short fiction, and maybe why you like the form of the short story?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It's one I hear a lot right now from friends and family. So a short fiction is obviously it's stories that are shorter. And a collection of short stories is a book of stories that are sometimes thematically connected, sometimes not. They don't have to be. Mine are thematically connected. So as you'll see, for those of you who read the book and for those who will read it, that the theme is women's transformations from girls to women, wives, mothers, and monsters. And so the trajectory of the book pretty much follows that list that I just outlined, starting with the younger women's experience of young adulthood and childhood and nostalgia, and working their way up through coming of age, and then those life transformations of becoming a wife and then a mother. And there is some monstrosity in there, as Joy mentioned, the vanishing point, a woman who becomes a deer. There's some literal monsters in the stories as well. But they're all connected with that through point, and they're all very different as well. Joy mentioned some of them are very short, like there are a couple that are just a few lines, and some that are more traditionally lengthy, maybe up to 20 pages or so. So the goal there was to provide some variation, some different forms. I played with some flash fiction, like Joy mentioned. Foresight is a piece of flash fiction. And then some of the really short pieces too, were my attempt to capture a specific period of time in a very short space. In some cases, it was a woman's whole life. In other cases, like Foresight, it's a woman's projected multiple lives, how many lives she could live. So yeah, so always sort of challenging and pushing myself through different forms.
Yeah, something I was really fascinated by in the collection is when you're reading through it, the stories are kind of chronological according to age of the protagonist, which I thought was such an interesting choice. As you can't say that about most story collections, that there's some sort of very clear pattern. But the earlier stories are younger protagonists. Midway through, we have protagonists who are mothers and adult women, and then you have some older protagonists looking back on their life, older women at the end. So I wondered too about your choice to order it that way, and I guess you kind of answered it. But do you want to comment on that sort of that ordering of the stories?
Sure. Yeah. I shuffled the stories around quite a bit when I looked for the final form the book would take. And that did seem to be the most natural progression for the stories. It was really looking back and nostalgia and young adulthood up through those milestones in a woman's life, to motherhood, and then beyond to the last few stories that take place after a woman's children are grown, and then her sense of identity what's sort of left of these women once their children have left home. And I see Sarah Jane had a question about whether this was a themed collection from the beginning or did it come together naturally? Yes and no, both. The theme actually started, it started out as a different theme pretty early on. A lot of the stories were centered around young adulthood and nostalgia. So I really thought that would be the theme of the book. But then as I sort of grew myself and became a wife and then a mother, my stories changed as well. I'm not sure I could go back and write the same stories that I wrote 5 years ago now. Now that I am a parent, that really changed my interest in the types of stories I want to tell. And I know, Joy, you'll be weaving in some questions. I will acknowledge Christopher's question. I didn't know Elizabeth McCracken when I was at BU, but I met her at Tin House last winter. She was my workshop leader there. And if you go to my website, which is, anyway, it's LaraEhrlich.com, and look at the upcoming events, you'll see one with Elizabeth McCracken at Northshire Bookstore in Vermont later this month.
I think there were a couple questions too about process and where you started. And actually, I was going to ask about that next too. Can you tell us just some logistics about what was your process like working on these? Where did you start? Was there one that was sort of the seed for all of these? And also, how long did you work on these stories as a whole?
Yeah, I think I started the first one in the collection maybe about 8 years ago. And I didn't work on them consistently for the last 8 years, but I'd work on one and send it out to a literary magazine and work on something else. And then the next story would sort of come about. So I would say this collection took in all probably about 7 or 8 years to write. And the seed for the collection. The first one I wrote in here was Animal Wife. It's the title story. And I thought at the time it was going to be a novel. So I wrote hundreds and hundreds of pages of this novel and it just wasn't coming together. And I realized eventually that it's because it shouldn't be a novel. It didn't hold together. So what it needed to be was a short story so that I could really focus on the daughter and her relationship with her absent mother. And so that really allowed me the freedom to focus as opposed to trying to work out other themes that just weren't quite working. There was a romance line in the book that I just sort of excised. So that was the seed for the collection. And I think that story started with 2 sentences that I left in the book up until the last draft. And then they finally came out. I didn't need them anymore. They're a little too obvious, but that's where it all started.
So interesting how sometimes the thing you love most is the thing that makes it to the very, very end, and then you no longer need it.
Yeah, kill your darlings, right?
Yeah, very fascinating. I know there's a bunch more questions. Before we go to the musical break, I wanted to ask you about another big thing about this book is that it won Red Hen Press the Fiction Award, judged by Anne Hood, and New York Times bestselling author Anne Hood, if you don't know who she is, who said that it made her dizzy with its exploration of the inner life and inner and outer lives of girls and women. So I wondered if you could talk a little about your experience as a debut author and what it's been like to win that award, and a little bit about the publishing experience, what it has been like for you leading up to now.
Yeah, well, as everyone here knows who is a writer, whether you're published or not, I think everyone's path is completely different, and mine was definitely not expected. I had a novel that I wrote before this collection, and I had a wonderful agent. I don't know if she's here, but Michelle Andelman, I'd like to give a shout out to her. She read Animal Wife first before anyone else, that title story, and really encouraged me to keep going with it. So thank you. What are we talking about? Publishing.
The journey I guess where you're starting is great though. I'm really curious.
So I wrote that book and had a great agent. We went through a number of publishers and had some interest, but it ultimately didn't sell, which at the time was disappointing. But now in retrospect, I think was the right choice. It was still a good book, but this is the book Animal Wife is the book that I really am glad I've written. I'm glad it's my debut book. So after that book was shelved, after that novel was shelved, and I started writing short stories, it felt good to have that control over the piece and to know when it was done, and I could write a story and send it out to a literary magazine and feel like things were happening. And when I had the stories combined into the collection and it felt whole and complete, and started sending it around, what we hear a lot with short stories is, love your short stories, come back when you have a novel, which after you've spent 8 years writing a book, it's like the last thing you want to hear. So I was sending the collection to agents, to publishers, to small presses, to contests, just anywhere, any publisher or contest or person who I thought might have an interest in the short fiction. And Red Hen had this great fiction award, and Anne Hood, as you said, selected it for publication. And once I had that book deal, then I reached out to my dream agent, Erin Harris, who I'm not sure if she was able to make it tonight, but a shout out to her as well.
Hi, Erin. I love Erin.
Hi, Erin. So that's kind of how it happened. It was a little backwards. It was like won the contest, the book was published, got the agent, and now working on a novel that hopefully will be my second project. So everyone's path is very different.
Yeah, and interesting. It's we don't know sometimes what seems like a failure or like you didn't make it can lead to the door and the route that you end up that is the best path forward. So yeah, it's really interesting. I know we are going to a musical interlude soon, but actually let me before that, okay, maybe we should cut. I was going to ask you, there was just a quick question about what you're reading this summer.
Oh God.
Maybe we could leave that one till after.
Yeah, because I want to give
think about it.
That's fair. Okay.
Okay, quick musical break, and we'll be back.
It's another original. Don't come up tonight. I would like to be alone, and I would like to hear my thoughts without you telling me just what I am thinking. Don't come up tonight. I would like to be myself, and I would like to be myself around myself without you calling me baby. People, they talk about it, they say, why do you change so much when you're around him, so much when you're around him. People, they talk about it, they say, why do you change so much when you're around him, so much when you're around him. Don't come up tonight. I'd like to be alone, and I would like to hear my thoughts without you telling me just what I'm thinking. Don't come up tonight. I'd like to be myself, and I want to be myself around myself without you calling me baby. you. Oh, sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Oh, I think we're back. Lara and I are back.
That
That was
great.
wonderful. Thank you, guys. Yeah, there's some definite silver linings to virtual events. I'm just in awe that here we all are able to tune in and talk from our different places. So I wanted to ask you before. We were going to follow up with the reading question, the summer reading. What have you been reading this summer that you're liking? That was Sophia's question.
Oh, thanks, so. I wish I had my big stack of books right here from Red Hen. I'll say that first. I'm reading, so I'm doing a lot of events with Red Hen authors coming up, and you can find that on the website as well. Right now, I'm reading Amy Sharon's book, Unseen City. And she and I are talking at Brookline Booksmith on Thursday night. So the book is beautiful so far. It has sort of similar themes, so I think it'll be a fun evening. And then a bunch of other fall Red Hen authors you can find there on the site. And other than that, a lot of pandemic reading. So this doesn't make much sense, but right before bed, I've been reading thrillers for some reason. They're comforting, which you wouldn't really expect, but I don't know.
How do you define pandemic reading? Is it about pandemics? Like
no. Like
the
it's in some ways like watching romantic comedies, you know, like when you just kind of need to turn your brain off. Not that thrillers are brain candy, but the ones I've been reading are they're sort of like the fun, sort of rompy thrillers. So
it's so interesting how our what we crave for what stories we are interested in or need change when something like this happens. I've been noticing that a lot too. So I'm really curious about the transformation at the heart of all these stories. And so every story in its own way has some aspect of transformation. I love the little girl in the first story, in Animal Wife, the title story, who is trying to transform herself in such a real way of trying to become tougher, practice punching. And then you have very mythical transformations, right? In The Vanishing Point, you have a woman mechanically and literally making herself into a deer. There's many more magical transformations throughout. But I wondered if you could talk to us about about transformation as a concept and what drew you to it, and does that have clearly there's a history of transformation in fairy tales and mythology. I think Liz also asked about your connection to nature and mythology. So maybe these all kind of connect, like transformation and mythology and nature. And how did you get drawn to these things, and what do they mean to you?
No, thank you. That's a great question, especially coming from you. And if there are people who have not read Joy's work, Joy is a beautiful writer. Check out her book, her short story, How to Survive on Land, which was just one of the most gorgeous stories about transformation that I've read in recent times. So check that out. And also a shout out to Liz, whose last name I'm going to butcher, Liz Zamska, whose short story, The Mushroom Queen, is another of my all-time favorite short stories about a woman who a mushroom colony takes over this woman's life and becomes her doppelganger. And it's just the most wonderful and crazy story. So yeah, I guess you can say I'm drawn to stories about transformation, whether they're contemporary stories by Liz and Joy, and some other great contemporary short story writers, or fairy tales. And I did grow up reading fairy tales, as you say, because in large part of those transformations that are often uncanny and frightening. And I was very drawn to that and what those transformations say about the characters. Because often it's not a fun or lighthearted transformation. It's a transformation born out of that character's dissatisfaction with themselves and with the society in which they live. If you think about the Little Mermaid, who is dissatisfied with her Twilight world and really looking for something different, even though she didn't quite know what that would be once she found it. So yeah, so I'm very drawn to those types of stories, especially when the transformation when through the transformation, the character realizes that they're really no better off, that the fantasy didn't lead them to some sort of escape, but instead led them to understand their own human weakness more deeply, which was what I was going for in the finishing point, that the woman who creates this dear body finds by putting it on that she's more aware than ever of her human body and of her human limitations.
It's fascinating. And I all your stories, they do really get at the darker aspect, the sort of like self-reflection of transformation, of facing the parts of yourself that are the hardest to face. And I just love that. And I recognized from the first pages of reading Animal Wife that you were a student and a lover of like the real fairy tales of like Grimm's and Hans Christian Andersen. And I've like, as someone who grew up with those stories too, I recognized it and loved it and thought you just really did a wonderful job. Something else that comes up a lot in all of the stories is the idea of motherhood. So it's a big concept in all of the stories that they explore it from different angles. There's mothers who transform. There's mothers who struggle with their role as mothers, who resist being a mother. There's the wonderful line, "She will not be constrained by the word mom," which I just think is so brilliant. And of course, you dedicate this collection to your own mother and your own daughter. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about the concept of motherhood in these stories, and specifically the dedication and what that means to you.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'll start by saying hi, Mom, and hi, Emmy, and that just to make sure that they hear this and that everyone else who reads the book hears this, that I love my mother and that I love being a mother. I love my daughter, and it was the best choice that I ever made. But a lot of these stories came before I became a mother. I wrote them before I had decided that was something I wanted to be. And I was struggling with that unknown, because really until you do it, you have no idea what it will be like. You see other people having children, and they all have such different experiences that you can't anticipate what you would be like as a parent or what your child might be like. So that was very terrifying to me. I've come to terms, I think, with the fact that I don't like uncertainty. I like to know what's going to happen. I like to be in control of situations. And so that's the ultimate loss of control and the ultimate uncertainty, to not only give your body over to another person, to growing another person, but to then live with that person for the rest of your life, and to have to, or to have the opportunity to help them grow into who they're going to be, whoever that is. So it's the ultimate, at first frightening and then joyful uncertainty. And at the time when I was writing these stories, I didn't have the perspective I do now, where it is all, for the most part, joyful. And it was largely fear. And so you can see a lot of that fear in the stories, fear of the unknown, fear of what my identity would be like, what would happen to my personal identity if I were to become a mother. And a lot of that was focused on the fear of losing that identity, of losing the things that I was passionate about, because I didn't know if motherhood would erase all of those parts of me. So you'll see in some of those sort of middle of the book stories a lot of worst case scenario situations, like the woman in Burn Rubber who becomes psychologically trapped in her car. And that was sort of about me worrying about entrapment and what it would feel like to be beholden to somebody for the next however many years of my life that I'll get to live. So anyway, so I dedicated the book to my mother and my daughter for those reasons. And I'll just say again, hi, Emmy. I hope you understand it when you get older, why it's dedicated to you.
It's such a wonderful juxtaposition between wildness and a sense of like absolute complete freedom and a sense of confinement. And in Desiree the Destroyer, that really, I think it just does an amazing job. We see Desiree the Destroyer, which is just this embodiment of that complete wildness and untamed. And then the Evie is, or Eve, color Eve. Eve is sort of the complete opposite. So just the different extremes and the whole spectrum of wildness to confinement. I want to quickly go to an audience question. Zoe was asking about, it kind of relates to what we were talking about interviewing. Did you interview people in different life stages, or did you do any research in the creation of these stories?
I did, yeah. I'll start with the easy research, which was the scientific research, or like less emotional research, I guess. Particularly for The Vanishing Point, the one about the woman in the deer body. I wanted that deer suit to be believable, but not too explicit, so that you can kind of decide in your own brain what that would look like. But I did do a lot of research on deer and on exosuits, and another shout out to BU. I know Andrew Thurston is there, and he wrote a great article about a BU professor who was creating an exosuit for soldiers to help them walk faster and carry a heavier load in training. So that sort of sparked this idea about biomechanics and how someone might create a suit like this. There was also a man, the goat, he's known as the Goat Man, who did create a goat suit and lived among goats for like 3 days. So that was really the seed of it. And then I tacked on the BU exosuit to that, and it sort of rolled out from there. But so, yeah,
it was so fascinated by that deer suit, and I'm tempted to. Can someone build this? Can we actually? Yeah, just fascinating, and like such an ambitious and technical story that you're like that you describe in such detail how this would work. So, yeah, but your research shows that it could. The Goat Man and
the Goat Man, and then I actually talked to a biomechanist at MIT, whose name I wish I could remember, but I talked to her about the hierarchy of biomechanics, and like at what point you would get your own lab and have a lab assistant and all of that, so that I could make this woman's like status within her university believable. And then she talked to me about some of the research she was doing, one of which was about snail slime as like a material for adherence or something. Anyway, it was very complicated, but
all the different things you get to learn as a writer.
Yeah,
rabbit holes.
Yeah, and I'm not sure, to your other question, that I did do much research on the emotional side of things about like interviewing mothers or other women. I don't think so, but certainly there are details from my own life and then from friends' lives. I'm sure some of you here tonight will recognize yourself in just little pieces. I certainly didn't write anyone else's stories into the book, but you'll recognize a little bit.
So great. Yeah, that's one of the secret pleasures, is having the real life kind of emerge in these little details. I'm so curious about your influences and your author heroes, and who you look up to as a writer. Like who would you say you're inspired by? And I know I actually was reading some of your answers in past interviews, and I know you've changed in style as a writer over the years. So I'd love to hear just about where you draw inspiration then versus now, and who you're clearly writing within a wonderful tradition of fabulous writers like Angela Carter, Karen Russell come to mind. So yeah, would love to hear.
Yeah, those are definitely two literary heroes. More recent, I would say, within like the last, 8 to 10 years. But as you said, yeah, my tastes have really changed, and it's not that I no longer love or enjoy the people that I had read in childhood, growing up through high school, college, and so on. It's just that I think, as we all do, our tastes change depending on our life, what's happening in our lives. But yes, early on, I would say, like really early in middle school, my influences were Edgar Allan Poe and Ray Bradbury, and I wrote these very bizarre short stories that I would send to the New Yorker, and of course never get published. But I tried, and I sent them out. They all had like crazy people and I probably shouldn't use that word anymore, but that's what they were called in the story. And then growing up through high school and into college, really, it was more Faulkner and Hemingway and James Joyce and Nabokov, and really a lot of modernist writers. And then only after school, I think, only after academia did I really lean more toward women writers and contemporary women writers. And I think that's coming out of academia, where you read the classics, and a lot of them, unfortunately, are still men, those giants of literature. So that is changing, I think. But in the meantime, I had to sort of seek them out myself. And as you said, Angela Carter, Karen Russell, Kelly Link. I'm terrible at thinking of names on the spot, but you get the idea. Oh, Catherine Dunn's Geek Love, which is one of my favorite books ever. So just women who are just weird and angry and sorry.
It's interesting. It kind of relates to, there's a question Rick asks about, have either of us considered, but I'll ask it to you, have you considered ever writing literary horror, given all these elements of transformation, mythology, nature, touches of supernatural? And it's interesting because some of those writers, like clearly Kelly Link, has sort of verges into horror, Angela Carter in certain ways. Have you considered writing literary horror ever?
That's a good question. And of course it is, because Rick is one of the writers over at the Day newspaper. So hi, Rick, and thank you for a great article the other day. Yeah, I think it would be really fun to, just the short answer, to write literary horror. I think, as Rick and I talked about last week in our conversation, I think horror often gets at some of those very raw places in our culture, in our society. If we think of Night of the Living Dead, that really was picking at, or I guess exploding, which shouldn't say picking out, like exploding open racism and lynching and all of that turmoil of its time. And Get Out, if we want to think about more contemporary stories, and Babadook, which sort of was a more intimate horror movie about a mother, back to the theme of motherhood. And I know I'm talking about movies here, but really, when I think about horror, I think I know more about movies than I do horror literature, and I should change that because I do think that would be fun.
I would love to read a literary horror piece by you. I was so amazed by the moments in all of these stories where you don't flinch from something that is actually violent and pretty gruesome in some ways. And I was just like, whoa, I didn't always think you would show us those moments, but I was sort of like pleasantly, if you can say that it's pleasant, because it's actually pretty intense, but there was like this real shock of like, wow, like being in awe that you showed those moments too. And I'll just say really fast to answer, I have actually written literary horror, Rick, from a contest, a prompt that gave that to me. And it was really amazing because there are a lot of wonderful overlaps between fabulism, speculative, transformation, these things that we're interested in and literary and horror.
Mm-hmm.
Lara, I want to ask you, so I know you've recently finished a draft of your novel, which would be your first novel, and it's from what you've told me, it sounds just amazing and absolutely as fantastical and magical as these stories in Animal Life. I wondered if can you tell us, give us a tiny glimpse of that project?
Sure.
And maybe when we can expect it, or I don't know.
Oh, well, that who knows? Like we were talking about before with timelines, it could be 10 years from now or never. You just kind of have to have blind faith that somebody will want to publish it, and people might want to read it. So, yeah, this was the book that I went to mermaid camp to research for, and it is about a mermaid. It's loosely based on the Little Mermaid fairy tale, in that there is a mermaid or a siren who becomes dissatisfied with her life beneath the sea, and barters for legs, and finds that she's just as dissatisfied on land as she was in the sea. Meanwhile, she has a daughter. So again, we have some motherhood themes here. And she runs away with her daughter to the coast, where she takes over a failing mermaid burlesque. And there she performs in a tale. So she is a former mermaid, now human, who performs as a mermaid. And lures other women there as well to perform with her, including her own daughter. So it's really a story about her and then her daughter as she grows up in this world and pushes back against it. And the research there was to go to Weeki Wachee, which is a mermaid. It is essentially a mermaid burlesque in Florida. It's one of the last roadside attractions that's become this like tourist world, I guess. It's like a whole park. And they have a siren camp every summer, and you go for 2 days and you wear a tail in the spring and you learn how to perform as a mermaid. So if you guys get a chance, go just Google Weeki Wachee mermaids, and there are tons of videos of these performances that date back to 1936, I think was the first date.
You know I'm going there. I'm following in your footsteps. I'm gonna make this happen. How did you find out about that? And what was it? How did you, was it Googling and you found this, or was it like a bucket list thing that you've known about?
No, I hadn't heard of it. So in Jeffrey Eugenides' Middlesex, there was a part in which the main character performs in a tank. And I don't even know if she was performing as a mermaid. It's been a while since I read that story. But it kind of sparked this part of this idea. And then I had to Google it because I was like, for some reason, I thought this was something that people did, like in Victorian England or something. And I found that no, it was in fact like a Florida tourist attraction that really existed, and that you can go learn how to do it yourself.
So cool! Such a cool like mix of fairy tale and like carnival, like yeah, very very interesting. Yeah. I really want to read your book, so I just please like get it out there so we can read it.
I'll keep you guys posted.
I'm just gonna. I guess we have a few minutes left, but I want to follow up. There's a couple questions here. Let's see. There's Zoe is asking, as a woman in her 60s, asking this question: how do you feel your collection of stories might differ from, say, a collection written by a woman, say, 30 years ago? So I guess, like, do you feel? I'm not actually sure I understand.
Well, let's see. Just to maybe while Zoe clarifies, I can see if I can answer what I think the question is, and then if it's different, just let us know. Yeah. So if I'm reading it right, are you asking that so right now I'm in my late 30s, and if I were to write this collection 30 years from now, how might it be different? Maybe that's the question. And I think it would be completely different. I think just as I now can't go back and write the same stories that open this book, I couldn't 30 years from now go back and write the ones that close it. It's just such, and I'm sure all of you guys who are writers understand that you can't really go back and write something again, because that period of your life has moved on, and your interests have shifted and changed, and your style and your experience and your craft has changed.
So we clarified, would the transformations be different? Would the transformations that the characters undergo?
Oh, I'm sure they would. I'm not sure how.
Yeah.
I'll have to try when I'm 20 years from now. I'll try to write the stories over again and see what happens, but I'm sure they would.
Yeah. So interesting. I guess in our final few minutes, I'm sure there are lots of writers here. What words or advice would you give? What would you say to other writers trying to get a collection together or out there? Do you have advice or something that one story does that I love is, what's the best writing advice that you've ever received?
Oh, that's
a lot of pressure question.
Yeah. Well, I think Amitha said it in the chat there, that perseverance is so important. And I think that to me was huge. And I'm sure I've heard it from so many people through the years, just that I think publishing a book is like 90% perseverance. And I'm sure there's raw talent in there too, but really just, you could write, as I did, a whole book that you believe in, and it might get shelved, but then just go on and write the next one. And let's see. I think something that I've heard as well that is really helpful to hear is there's always someone out there who wants to read what you've written. Like there's at least one person and probably thousands more who, if you find a story compelling, will also find it compelling and want to read it.
Yeah. And like identifying who you're writing towards. And it might be a very specific type of person that was like maybe you as a child and like what you wanted to read, or you as a 40-something person that would what you'd want to read. So figuring out who that audience is. I totally agree with you.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's see. Do I have time for one final question? I think that was in the. I don't know if you answered, Lara. If you answered this High's question in the. I think it was. I saw him also writing it in the chat. But it's the idea of how viscerally you express the particularly in 6 Roses, the world of adolescent girls, and how is it that you can feel this experience so viscerally? I guess he's saying as a man, like he felt that and was almost embarrassed to feel like so viscerally put into the experience of an adolescent girl.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm really glad to hear that sounds weird, but we're glad to hear that you found that a little embarrassing, because girlhood is embarrassing. I think if I look back, that's probably one of the strongest emotions I feel around being a preteen and young teenager is embarrassment and shame and just feeling uncomfortable in your own body and unsure about the experiences that other people are having around you, and that you know that you are sort of expected at some point to participate in. So I imagine it would be embarrassing for an adult man to read those stories. It's embarrassing for me to go back and read my journals, but I kept journals religiously, and I do often go back to remind myself of what that felt like, so I can draw from it. So that's one way that I feel it so viscerally while writing, is because I did chronicle it so carefully while growing up, and everything felt so important and dramatic. So I have pages and pages about every glance that some boy gave me across the room, and but yeah. So hi, thank you for being embarrassed, and yeah, hope that answered the question. But
Right there with you. My journals from that time are painstakingly detailed. So I know we're out of time here, but I just want to say that Lara will also be a featured reader at the organization that I run, Pioneer Valley Writers Workshop. In October, she is a featured reader alongside 3 other amazing authors in our fall fiction reading. I'll share the link right here in case people want to check that out. She's also teaching. She's also teaching a wonderful 2-hour workshop at Pioneer Valley Writers Workshop on mythical transformations in fairy tales and fiction. So that's for writers of all levels. And I will have like a very generative, fun doing writing plus looking at other text element. So feel free to check out her class there too at Pioneer Valley Writers Workshop. Really glad to have her on board.
Thank you guys so much. And we'll turn it over to Ani for a few last words. And I think we have another song, but I just want to thank you all so much for coming, for asking such great questions, for bearing with me, because this is my first virtual event and I am not comfortable in front of the camera. So thank you for hanging out with me. And thanks to Joy and to Ani as well, and to Pat and Brad.
Thank you, guys.
So before we bring Pat and Brad back up to play out the end of the event, I, of course, want to return the thanks. Thank you, Lara and Joy. What an incredible conversation, and just such a fabulous evening. And Lara, truly, this was your brainchild of creating such an immersive event. So hats off to you. I'm so glad that we were able to put our heads together and make this work. It's been awesome. Ooh. Sounds like someone's phone is dinging. So Before we bring Kat and Brad back up, I just want to say, if you'd like to order a copy of Animal Wife, I have some really beautiful signed by Lara copies. I'm just going to hold that up to the screen. So you can get those through our website, which you can click on the green button below. Buying books from an independent bookstore who is producing events helps support their events program, as well as the author and the bookstore. So it's a really integral part of the whole experience. And speaking of events, we have a couple other great events coming up in the next week. Tomorrow night, we'll be joined by Heidi Pittler for her book Impersonation. Thursday night, Rick Coster will be back with James Ben to talk about Ben's new book, The Red Horse. And then on Sunday, we are hosting Yagi Yasi to talk about her new book, Transcendent Kingdom, with Associate Professor of Dance from Connecticut College, Shani Collins-Akile. So you can check out our events calendar or follow us on Crowdcast to keep up with all of our upcoming events. And with that, I say thank you to all of you for tuning in, and let's bring Kat and Brad back up on stage and enjoy a song and let them play the event out. So let's all wave goodbye, ladies, and we'll let Kat and Brad take it away.
Here tonight, we don't get to do many book launches, and this is a really special book, so be sure to grab your copy, everybody. It's a memorable one.
Absolutely.
And yeah, this has been so much fun. We're gonna finish off with a track on our album, the last track on our album. If you're interested in finding our music, please go to catbradband.com.
And that's Cat with a K, Brad with a B, and Band with a B.
Yeah, and keep supporting your local author, your local bookshop, and your local artists, everybody. And thanks for tuning in. All right, this was called Sugar Baby. 1, 2, 3.
Oh, sugar baby, won't you come down to me? I long to love thee and offer my melody. Oh, sugar baby, come down the stairs with your pretty brown hair to me. And kiss me, let the moon witness our love song. And hold me, let our melodies roll into one. Beneath your window tonight.
Oh, silly baby, you can have a key. Oh, you don't have to win me, for there's no one you can compete. Oh, silly baby, come up the stairs, let the neighbors say the prayers and please. Come kiss me, let the moon witness our love song. Hold me, let our melodies roll into one. Beneath my window tonight.
Kiss me, let the moon witness our love song. And hold me, let our melodies roll into one. Beneath your window tonight.
Beneath my window tonight.
Beneath our window tonight.
Thanks so
Thank
much,
you.
everybody. Thanks, Lara, Anastasia, and Joy.